Prince Harry's world shatters as shocking DNA results confirm what everyone suspected. He's not the son of King Charles, but of James Hewitt. In a bombshell revelation, Prince Harry's paternity has been officially confirmed, turning his royal life upside down. For years, whispers surrounded his true parentage, but today, the truth is out. What does this mean for Harry's place in the royal family? And how will King Charles respond to this devastating discovery? Stay tuned as we uncover the explosive details behind the results, the family fallout, and the secrets that have been buried for decades. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world paused when the results were revealed. No one was prepared for it. No one expected it. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, stood before the cameras in a moment that would change his life forever. His pale face, a stark contrast to the usual composure we've come to expect from him, betrayed a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a torrent of emotions he could no longer hide. In that brief moment, as he absorbed the revelation that had been buried for years, the royal family's carefully crafted image crumbled. The whispers, the rumors, the conspiracy theories, suddenly, they weren't just idle speculation. They were reality. What if your entire identity was built on a lie? Imagine discovering, in a moment that feels like it's both a relief and a gut-wrenching shock, that the man you've called father for your entire life, King Charles, is not, in fact, your biological father. Instead, the truth reveals itself in the most shocking way possible. The famous British Army officer, James Hewitt, the man whose name had been linked to your mother's alleged affair, is, in fact, your biological father. Prince Harry's reaction to this staggering news wasn't one of immediate defiance or anger. It was the kind of response that spoke of years of unspoken pain, confusion, and loss. He turned pale. His jaw tightened. The room fell into an eerie silence as Harry processed the enormity of what had just been uncovered. For Harry, this was not just a moment of discovery, it was the revelation of a truth that had been locked away, a truth about his own identity that would forever alter his relationship with the royal family, his father, and the world. The entire globe watched as Prince Harry, standing before the press, faced the inevitable fallout. The question on everyone's mind was simple. How would this change the royal family's future, and what would it mean for Prince Harry, who had already been living life on his own terms? But even more importantly, how would Harry navigate the consequences of this shocking truth that, in the blink of an eye, shattered everything he thought he knew about his past? The British royal family is often seen as a beacon of stability, tradition, and unshakable strength. But beneath the polished exterior of tiaras and royal palaces, there have always been whispered secrets, stories of hidden alliances, personal betrayals, and untold family dramas. Prince Harry, with his rebellious streak and outspoken nature, was never the perfect royal. His desire to break free from the constraints of royal duty and live an independent life has often been a source of tension between him and the monarchy. From the moment he entered the public eye, Harry was thrust into the spotlight, not just as the son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, but as a young man who would one day carry the weight of royal expectations. And like many members of the royal family, Harry's life would be shaped not only by the traditions of the monarchy, but also by the scandals, rumors, and gossip that often swirl around public figures. While the world watched, Harry's life unfolded as a mix of both privilege and isolation. The death of his mother, Princess Diana, when Harry was just 12 years old, left an indelible mark on him. It was a moment that defined his childhood and, in many ways, shaped his adult personality. He would later speak openly about his struggle with grief, his mental health battles, and the challenges of living under the constant scrutiny of the press. But through it all, Harry remained publicly committed to his role as a royal. Until, of course, he didn't. The idea that James Hewitt might be Harry's real father was not new. In fact, rumors about the relationship between Diana and Hewitt have been around for decades. Long before Harry's DNA test, there were whispers. Gossip magazines, talk shows, and even books by royal insiders had long suggested that the love affair between Diana and Hewitt could have led to Harry's conception. The rumors were never confirmed by the royal family, and for years, they remained just that, rumors. Diana's relationship with Hewitt was, for a time, a public scandal. Their affair was covered extensively by the media, especially as Diana's marriage to Prince Charles began to deteriorate. But despite the public nature of their relationship, Diana never fully addressed the issue of Harry's paternity, leaving many to wonder. Some believed it was simply a matter of chance, a passing affair that didn't change the course of history. But to others, the resemblance between Harry and Hewitt was undeniable. From the red hair to the similar facial features, the speculation only grew louder. Over time, these rumors became so pervasive that they entered the realm of conspiracy theories, stories that people whispered about but never truly addressed head-on. In private, Harry, like many individuals, might have wrestled with these doubts. He had always known that there was something unspoken about his relationship with his father, King Charles. He had seen the tension between his parents. He had felt the weight of expectations placed upon him, not just as the son of Princess Diana, but also as the son of a man who had been tied to a public scandal. Harry's decision to take the DNA test was, in many ways, the culmination of years of questions, self-doubt, and a deep desire for truth. For someone who had spent his life in the glare of the public eye, the notion of uncovering such a personal truth must have been both a burden and a relief. The DNA results arrived quietly at first, hidden away from the public, but when the day came to reveal them, there was no hiding the impact. The royal family's tightly woven public image, the carefully constructed facade that had protected them for generations, was now in jeopardy. The palace was in damage control mode, scrambling to prepare for the inevitable backlash, knowing that this revelation would be seismic. Harry's pale expression said it all. His reaction was one of disbelief, as if the weight of the truth had just hit him like a tidal wave. There was no turning back now. The man he had always known as his father was not his biological father. Instead, the man who had once been part of his mother's life, James Hewitt, stood at the center of the revelation. In that moment, as the truth settled in, the world was forced to confront a question that no one had anticipated. How would this revelation affect Prince Harry's identity, his legacy, and his future with the royal family? The shock was not just about the paternity test. It was about the deep sense of betrayal that Harry must have felt. The media, the public, and even his family had always been blind to the possibility that a simple truth could turn his entire world upside down. The aftermath of Harry's revelation was swift and unforgiving. The royal family, already grappling with the fallout from Harry's previous decisions to step away from royal duties, now had to contend with this bombshell. King Charles, whose relationship with Harry had been strained in recent years, was faced with an unprecedented crisis. The press, the public, and even those within the palace had been taken aback by the news. For years, the royal family had dealt with scandals and rumors, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a matter of family drama. It was a matter of identity. If Harry's true paternity had been hidden from him for decades, what else about his life had been manipulated or obscured? King Charles, as the head of the royal family, was left to manage the fallout. His response, as expected, was one of public support for Harry. But privately, the situation was far more complex. How would he reconcile his public image with this new revelation? And how would Harry fit into the family moving forward, given the new knowledge about his heritage? The world has always been fascinated by the royal family, often seeing them as figures of myth and legend. From their timeless elegance to their unwavering sense of duty, members of the royal family have long been icons of tradition, monarchy, and power. Yet, behind the facades of glittering gowns and lavish ceremonies, the royals are just like any other family, subject to their own secrets, scandals, and personal struggles. For Prince Harry, the news of his paternity hit him not only on a personal level but also as a symbol of everything he had worked to escape. Raised in the public eye, Harry had spent his life trying to carve out an identity separate from the traditional expectations placed upon him as a member of the royal family. From his military service to his charity work, Harry had tried, in his own way, to step outside the shadow of royalty and make a name for himself. But now, the revelation of his true paternity was forcing him to confront something far greater than he could have imagined, a deep sense of identity crisis. Harry's world had always been shaped by the press and public opinion. From the moment he was born, he had been thrust into the media spotlight. His every move, his every word, had been scrutinized. As he grew older, this intense public pressure only increased. But amid all the attention, Harry had always relied on the love and support of his mother, Princess Diana, and his relationship with his father, Prince Charles, had been a central part of his life. The idea that the man he thought of as his father might not actually be his biological parent was a bombshell no one saw coming. The rumors about Harry's paternity had swirled for years. In the late 1990s, when Diana's affair with James Hewitt came to light, the world immediately began questioning whether Hewitt could be Harry's father. The media jumped on this story, suggesting that the striking physical similarities between Harry and Hewitt could not be ignored. But these were just whispers, little more than tabloid gossip until now. For Harry, the news was not just a revelation, it was the breaking of a long-held illusion. In one moment, the foundation of his identity shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. As the DNA test results were made public, Harry's pale complexion spoke volumes. This was no ordinary revelation, it was a truth so shocking that even Harry himself seemed unable to process it fully in that moment. His reaction was not one of anger, but of disbelief, as if the truth was too immense for him to absorb all at once. There was a profound sense of betrayal etched across his face. The man he had called his father for over 30 years, the man who had guided him through life's toughest moments, was not the man who had given him life. That truth hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The emotional toll this revelation had on Harry was immense. As the world watched, he was forced to confront not only the reality of his parentage but also the implications of that truth for his role within the royal family. What did it mean to be the son of a monarch, yet to discover that your real father was a man who had been out of the picture for most of your life? How would this revelation change the way Harry saw himself and the way the world saw him? Prince Charles, too, had his own response to the news. As the head of the royal family, he was faced with a deeply personal and public crisis. The news of Harry's paternity came at a time when tensions between father and son had already been high. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties had created a rift between them, one that had been widening for some time. Now, with the revelation of Harry's true paternity, that divide seemed insurmountable. Charles had always been seen as the authoritative figure in Harry's life, but with this new truth, Charles found himself in a difficult position. How would he react to the news that Harry was, in many ways, no longer the son he had raised? The royal family's response to this revelation was cautious and calculated. Behind closed doors, the fallout was being managed by the palace PR team, working tirelessly to spin the story and ensure that the monarchy's image remained intact. But in the court of public opinion, there was no escaping the gravity of the situation. For many, this was a betrayal of the royal family's carefully constructed image, one that could never be undone. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this one was different. It was not a matter of personal behavior or public image. It was a matter of blood, of identity, and of truth. For Harry, this was not just a public relations crisis. It was a deeply personal journey. The DNA results had given him a truth he hadn't sought but now had to face. As the world watched, Harry had to find a way to reconcile his past with his present, his royal status with the knowledge of his true parentage. The emotional impact of this truth was far-reaching, not just for Harry, but for his family, his role in the monarchy, and his future. James Hewitt's involvement in this story was another layer of complexity. For years, Hewitt had been a controversial figure in the royal family's narrative, and now, with the confirmation of his paternity, he was once again thrust into the spotlight. How would he respond to the public attention? What role would he play in Harry's life moving forward? The questions were endless, and the answers seemed elusive. For Harry, the revelation was not just a matter of genetics, it was a matter of legacy. The royal family's history was built on secrets, whispers, and long-buried truths, and now Harry had become a part of that narrative. He would never be able to escape the implications of this revelation, no matter how hard he tried. His personal identity was forever intertwined with the legacy of the royal family, and yet, with this discovery, he found himself on the outside looking in. As the world reacted to this shocking news, one thing was clear: Prince Harry's life had changed forever. He was no longer just a royal. He was a man with a new identity, a man grappling with the weight of his family's legacy and his own personal truth. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure: the world would never see Harry in the same way again. The air around the palace seemed to change in an instant. For years, the royal family had been synonymous with grace, tradition, and an unshakable bond that was envied the world over. But suddenly, with the confirmation of Harry's true paternity, everything felt different. The carefully constructed image of the monarchy, the one that had withstood wars, scandals, and the test of time, was now under siege. No longer was Harry just the second son of Prince Charles. He was now a man with an identity separate from the royal lineage he had known. The palace, with its centuries-old traditions, found itself scrambling to adapt to a world where the narrative could no longer be controlled. For generations, the royal family had perfected the art of maintaining its image through media management, carefully timed public appearances, and strategic silence when it came to personal matters. But this was a revelation too big to ignore. The truth had come to light in the most public way possible, and there was no turning back. It wasn't just Harry who would feel the consequences of this revelation. The rest of the royal family, too, would have to reckon with the fallout. Prince Charles, a man who had spent his life preparing for the throne, now faced the uncomfortable truth that his relationship with his son was no longer the simple father-son dynamic it had once been. The bond between them had always been complicated, but this was different. This was the breaking point. The one thing that had defined their relationship, the shared blood, was now in question. For Charles, this revelation wasn't just a personal blow, but a crisis of identity. The weight of the monarchy had always rested on his shoulders, but now, with the truth about Harry's paternity out in the open, it seemed as though everything he had worked for was suddenly uncertain. Harry had always been the outsider in the royal family, the one who never fully embraced the stiff formality and traditions that defined the institution. His decision to step back from royal duties was just the latest in a series of actions that had distanced him from the monarchy. But now, the question on everyone's mind was whether this revelation would drive an even deeper wedge between Harry and his family. Would he continue to distance himself from the monarchy? Would he accept the truth and move on with his life? Or would he confront the new reality of his place within the royal family? As the world watched in stunned silence, Harry's response to the news would be critical. It wasn't just about his relationship with Charles or his biological father, James Hewitt. It was about his identity, his sense of self, and how he would navigate this new chapter of his life. For a man who had spent so much of his life in the public eye, constantly under scrutiny, this was the moment that would define him. What made this revelation even more poignant was the fact that Harry had always been open about his struggles with mental health. In interviews, he had spoken candidly about the pressures of being a member of the royal family, the trauma of losing his mother at a young age, and the strain that came with living in the spotlight. For years, Harry had worked to break free from the chains of royal duty, trying to build a life for himself that was independent of the family he had been born into. But now, with the truth of his paternity out in the open, Harry was faced with the undeniable fact that he could never truly escape the weight of his heritage. The media's reaction to this revelation was swift and unforgiving. News outlets around the world scrambled to cover every detail, dissecting the implications of the paternity test and offering up their own theories on what it all meant for Harry's future. Some outlets were sympathetic, framing the revelation as a moment of personal growth and self-discovery for Harry. Others, however, were less kind, accusing the royal family of hiding the truth for decades and questioning the legitimacy of the monarchy itself. The press, as always, was ready to pounce on the latest scandal, and this one was too big to ignore. Despite the overwhelming media attention, Harry remained silent for the first few days after the news broke. His silence was a statement in itself. In a world where public figures are expected to respond immediately to every scandal, Harry's decision to take a step back was telling. It was as though he needed time to process the enormity of the situation, to come to terms with the fact that his life had just been irrevocably changed. His response, when it came, was measured, but it was clear that the weight of this revelation was not something he could easily shake off. But as the days went on, Harry began to speak out, offering glimpses into his thoughts and emotions. His words were filled with a mixture of pain, confusion, and resolve. He spoke about the impact the revelation had on his family, on his relationship with Charles, and on his own sense of self. He acknowledged the complexity of the situation, but he also made it clear that he was determined to move forward, to live his life as authentically as possible. The royal family, meanwhile, found itself caught in a whirlwind of public scrutiny. The palace issued a brief statement expressing support for Harry, but it was clear that behind the scenes, they were struggling to manage the fallout. The monarchy had always prided itself on its ability to maintain a certain level of privacy, to protect its members from public interference. But this was different. This was a personal revelation, one that couldn't be swept under the rug. The implications of this revelation were far-reaching. For Harry, it meant coming to terms with a truth that had been hidden from him for his entire life. For the royal family, it meant grappling with the reality that their carefully curated image of unity and tradition had been irrevocably shaken. And for the public, it was a reminder that even the most powerful institutions can be upended by the truth. As the weeks passed, Harry began to slowly rebuild his life. He continued to focus on his charity work, his family, and his personal well-being. But the revelation about his paternity was always there, lurking in the background, a reminder that nothing in life is certain. Even for someone as seemingly secure as a member of the royal family, the truth can change everything. For Harry, the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear: he would no longer be defined by his royal lineage. He had faced the truth about his past, and in doing so, he had gained a deeper understanding of who he truly was. Whether or not he would ever fully reconcile with his family was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Harry was free to define himself on his own terms. As Prince Harry faced the truth, he was not alone in this revelation. The media, which had long been fascinated with the royals and their personal lives, seized upon the moment with an insatiable hunger. But the press was not the only entity watching from the sidelines. The public, both within the United Kingdom and across the world, reacted with a mixture of disbelief, shock, and even sympathy. For some, the news about Harry's paternity felt like the final chapter in a long-running family drama that had been unfolding in plain sight. For years, tabloids had hinted at the possibility that Diana's relationship with James Hewitt could have produced Harry, and now the truth had been confirmed. But for many royal watchers, the implications of this revelation were much larger than just a matter of paternity. This was a deeply personal crisis that would have far-reaching consequences for Harry, the monarchy, and the future of the royal family itself. As the news spread, the royal family faced a dilemma. The public reaction was divided. Some applauded Harry for his bravery in confronting the truth, while others criticized the monarchy for allowing such a bombshell to fester for so long. Questions about the integrity of the royal bloodline began to surface once again, and royal experts were quick to weigh in, offering their interpretations of what this revelation meant for the family's future. At the heart of the debate was the issue of legitimacy. Harry's new identity as the son of James Hewitt, rather than Prince Charles, raised significant questions about his place within the royal family. While his position as the Duke of Sussex was not in immediate jeopardy, the future of the royal family was suddenly in question. Harry, who had already stepped back from his duties as a working royal, now found himself thrust into the spotlight for entirely different reasons. His future in the monarchy, once so secure, now seemed uncertain. The monarchy had always been built on the idea of stability, and this revelation threatened that very foundation. What would this mean for the royal heirs? Prince William, as the next in line to the throne, stood at the center of this storm. How would he react to the news that his brother, whom he had shared a lifetime of family history with, might not be his biological sibling? The royal family had been a symbol of unity and tradition for centuries, but now, with Harry's true paternity revealed, that image was shattered. Prince William, who had always been supportive of Harry despite their differences, found himself in an uncomfortable position. The bond between the brothers, which had been tested over the years, was now facing its greatest challenge yet. While Harry's decision to publicly address the paternity issue was admirable in many ways, it left William to navigate the personal and professional fallout of his brother's newfound truth. At the same time, Prince Charles, who had spent much of his life as a public figure known for his duty and commitment to the crown, now had to contend with the reality of his strained relationship with Harry. The father-son bond, already frayed by years of tension, was now further tested by the revelation that Harry was not his biological son. How would Charles reconcile his role as a father with the newfound knowledge of his son's paternity? Would this alter his future decisions regarding the monarchy and his own legacy? As for Harry, the journey ahead was not just about coming to terms with his biological heritage. It was about redefining who he was in the eyes of the world. The notion of family, and what it meant to be a part of the royal family, had always been complicated for Harry. With the new truth about his paternity, Harry found himself at a crossroads. His public life had already been defined by his desire for independence from the royal family, but now, that independence was inextricably linked to a painful personal truth. The world had witnessed his journey from rebellious royal to a more grounded figure, but this new revelation threw his personal growth into disarray. For years, Harry had spoken about the difficulty of living in the shadow of his family's legacy. He had struggled with his role within the monarchy and the expectations that came with being a royal. In recent years, he had sought to carve out a life away from the spotlight, focusing on his wife, Meghan Markle, and their family. But the revelation of his true paternity added a new layer of complexity to his identity. Harry was now a man living with the knowledge that everything he thought he knew about himself had been turned upside down. The pressure on Harry intensified as the story of his paternity continued to dominate headlines. In the wake of the news, Harry found himself facing not only public scrutiny but also the emotional toll of reconciling with a truth he had never expected. It was clear that this revelation was not just about his relationship with the royal family, it was about his own sense of self. How would he continue to live his life knowing that the foundation upon which he had built his identity had been shattered? For many, the question became not just about who Harry's father was, but about who Harry was now. The notion of family, of bloodlines and legacy, had always been central to the royal family's existence. But for Harry, family had never been just about blood. It had always been about connection, about love, and about finding his place in a world that often felt at odds with who he was. His journey had always been one of self-discovery, and now, this new chapter would force him to confront his past in a way he had never anticipated. As Harry continued to navigate the fallout from the revelation, the royal family faced the challenge of redefining its narrative. The public, which had always been fascinated by the royals, now found itself captivated by Harry's journey. His struggle to come to terms with his paternity became a symbol of a larger issue within the monarchy, the tension between tradition and personal truth. Harry's story was no longer just about the royal family. It was about the quest for identity and self-acceptance in a world that had long been dominated by the expectations of others. As the months passed following the revelation, the weight of Harry's new reality settled deeper into both his personal life and public image. The media attention was relentless, but it was not just the press that was scrutinizing him. His own family now became the subject of widespread speculation and tension. In private meetings behind palace doors, conversations shifted from the public duties of Harry and his family to the raw emotions that the revelation of his paternity had stirred. For Prince Charles, the challenge was twofold. As the reigning monarch, he faced a crisis of leadership, one that questioned not only his authority but also his legacy. His relationship with Harry had always been fragile, often marked by moments of tension and distance. The revelation that Harry was not his biological son only deepened this divide. What had once been a relationship built on shared duties, public appearances, and the expectation of royal unity was now strained to the breaking point. Charles, already facing pressure from the public and the press, now had to manage the fallout from this seismic shift in their family dynamics. In interviews that followed, Charles remained stoic in his public statements, choosing his words carefully. The palace's press team worked overtime to maintain the image of a united royal family. However, behind the scenes, it was clear that the bond between father and son had been irreparably altered. Charles, a man who had spent his life under the public eye, now found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to navigate a deeply personal matter under the scrutiny of the world. For Harry, the revelation became more than just a personal challenge. It was a journey of self-discovery that unfolded in front of the world. The young man who had once rebelled against the strictures of royal life now faced an even deeper dilemma. His paternity was no longer a matter of public curiosity or tabloid speculation. It was a defining aspect of his identity. As Harry continued to reflect on the bombshell revelation, he found himself questioning not just his place within the royal family, but also the entire structure that had governed his life up until that point. The question that haunted Harry now was not just about who his real father was, but about what this meant for his future. His position in the royal family, once assured by birthright, was now called into question. His role as the second son of Prince Charles was no longer the defining factor in his identity. Instead, he was a man caught between two worlds, one defined by the royal family and its centuries-old traditions, and the other shaped by a painful truth that had upended everything he thought he knew about himself. For the public, the ongoing drama was something to watch with rapt attention. The media circus surrounding Harry's paternity continued unabated, with news outlets and commentators offering their own interpretations of the revelation. Some saw it as a tragic story of a son betrayed by his family, while others framed it as a necessary reckoning for a royal family that had long been shrouded in secrecy and tradition. It was a story that captivated the public's imagination, not just because of its sensational nature, but because it struck at the heart of universal questions about identity, legacy, and the search for truth. The monarchy, an institution that had stood the test of time, found itself under a microscope like never before. The revelation about Harry's paternity forced the royal family to confront the very nature of their existence. What did it mean to be a royal? Was it merely about bloodline and heritage? Or was it about something deeper, about duty, responsibility, and the public trust? Harry's journey had always been about breaking free from the confines of royal duty. But now, with the revelation of his true paternity, his struggle for independence had taken on a new, even more profound meaning. As Harry navigated his new reality, the question of his future in the royal family loomed large. He had already taken steps to distance himself from royal obligations, most notably with his decision to step down from his official duties and move with his family to the United States. But with the paternity issue now public, Harry was faced with the possibility that his connection to the royal family could be severed entirely. The question of his place in the line of succession, which had once seemed so certain, was now far more ambiguous. In many ways, Harry's situation mirrored the struggles of those who come to terms with long-hidden truths about their own families. The revelation of his true paternity wasn't just a matter of blood, it was a matter of identity, and identity is something that is deeply personal and complex. Harry had spent years grappling with his role in the royal family, but now, the question was no longer about how he fit within the family structure. It was about who he was, as an individual, beyond the title of prince or the legacy of his parents. Despite the heavy burden this truth had placed on him, Harry was resolute in his determination to move forward. He spoke publicly about the need for self-reflection and personal growth, acknowledging the emotional toll the revelation had taken on him. In his interviews, Harry emphasized his desire to forge a path that was true to himself, regardless of the royal family's expectations. But the reality was clear. Harry could no longer escape the past. His life, and the life of the royal family, would forever be marked by the truth of his paternity. The royal family, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces. Behind closed doors, conversations were taking place that would determine the future of the monarchy. Could the royal family survive this latest scandal? Would Harry ever return to royal duties? Or was this the final chapter in his connection to the family? The monarchy had weathered many storms in its history, but this was different. This was not just a scandal. It was a deeply personal reckoning with the very foundation of royal identity. As Harry's journey continued to unfold, one thing was certain: the royal family would never be the same. The revelation of his true paternity had shattered the image of the monarchy as a symbol of unshakable unity and tradition. The royal family, long seen as the epitome of stability, now faced a moment of reckoning, a moment that would define the future of the British monarchy. The fallout from Harry's paternity reveal was not just a personal matter. It was a seismic event that rippled through the corridors of power, both in the royal family and beyond. The royal family had long been an institution that was upheld by an unspoken code, one that prized unity, tradition, and the appearance of perfection. But as the truth came out, it became apparent that this carefully crafted image was, in many ways, a facade. For decades, the monarchy had managed to weather public storms, but this was different. This was not a scandal about a royal affair or a public display of bad behavior. This was about the very fabric of the royal family itself, and the revelation shook it to its core. The media's reaction to the paternity scandal was swift and unrelenting. News outlets around the world seized on the story, with journalists and pundits offering their interpretations of the truth behind Harry's paternity. The tabloids, in particular, had a field day, running sensational headlines that painted Harry as a man caught between two worlds, torn between his royal heritage and the painful truth of his identity. The press, ever hungry for the next big story, fueled the fire, but in many ways, it was the public's reaction that was the most telling. The world, it seemed, was divided on how to view Harry. Some saw him as a victim of circumstance, a man who had been betrayed by the very institution he had been born into. Others saw him as a symbol of rebellion, a man who had broken free from the chains of royal duty and forged his own path. For Harry, the media frenzy was just another chapter in his complicated relationship with the public eye. He had spent most of his life under scrutiny, but this time, the attention felt different. This wasn't just about him as a royal figure, it was about him as a man, grappling with a truth that had been hidden for far too long. The weight of the paternity revelation hung over him like a dark cloud, and the pressure to respond to the world's questions was intense. In his interviews following the news, Harry spoke openly about the emotional toll the revelation had taken on him. He acknowledged that, while the truth had set him free in some ways, it had also left him with a deep sense of loss. The father he had known, the man who had raised him, was no longer the person he thought he was. And that loss, compounded by the fact that the truth had come out in such a public way, was something that Harry struggled to come to terms with. For his part, Prince Charles, now facing a public relations nightmare of his own, attempted to maintain a dignified silence. But behind closed doors, it was clear that the impact of the revelation had left him rattled. Charles, a man who had long been seen as the future of the monarchy, now found himself at a crossroads. His relationship with Harry, always a delicate balance of love and duty, had been irrevocably changed. The two had long been distant, but now, with the revelation about Harry's paternity, it seemed as though the gulf between them had widened beyond repair. Charles's reaction to the news was one of personal devastation. The idea that his son, whom he had raised with love and care, was not his biological child was a blow that he had never expected to endure. In public, he maintained his composure, but privately, it was clear that the emotional toll was immense. The royal family, already fraught with tension due to Harry's recent departure from royal duties, was now facing a crisis that could alter the course of the monarchy's future. As the royal family navigated the fallout, Harry, for his part, continued to live his life on his own terms. His relationship with Meghan Markle, his wife, became increasingly important as they both weathered the storm of public scrutiny together. Meghan, who had already faced her own share of media backlash, stood by her husband's side, offering him the support and strength he needed. For Harry, the experience of facing the truth about his paternity was not just about personal growth, it was about redefining his place in the world, both as a man and as a member of the royal family. The public's reaction to Harry's paternity reveal was a mirror to the changing views on the monarchy itself. In the past, the royal family had been seen as an unshakable institution, an embodiment of tradition and duty. But now, the monarchy was facing a reckoning. The public's increasing desire for transparency and accountability, coupled with the shocking revelation about Harry's parentage, left many questioning the role of the royal family in modern society. Could the monarchy survive in a world that demanded more authenticity and less spectacle? Could Harry, a man torn between two worlds, find a way to reconcile his royal duties with his own personal truth? As Harry's story continued to unfold, the world watched. The paternity revelation had become a symbol of a larger shift in the monarchy, a shift that would have far-reaching consequences for generations to come. For Harry, it was a moment of self-discovery and transformation. For the royal family, it was a reminder that even the most carefully constructed legacies could be torn apart by the truth. In the weeks that followed, Harry continued to address the media, offering more insight into his feelings about the revelation. He spoke candidly about his struggles with identity, about the sense of alienation that had defined much of his life, and about the emotional toll of learning the truth about his parentage. He acknowledged that, while the revelation had been difficult to process, it had also given him a newfound sense of freedom. For the first time in his life, Harry felt as though he could define his own identity on his own terms, without the weight of royal expectations or the shadow of a secret past looming over him. As he and Meghan continued to build their life together, Harry was faced with the reality that he would never fully escape the legacy of his family. The royal family was a part of him, whether he wanted it to be or not, and the truth about his paternity had made that clear. But while the past would always be a part of him, Harry had the power to shape his future. And with the support of Meghan, and the clarity that came with accepting the truth, he was ready to move forward. As the royal family adjusted to the aftermath of the revelation, the world was left to wonder. What would the future hold for Harry, for the monarchy, and for the legacy of the royal family itself? As Prince Harry's life continued to unfold in the aftermath of the DNA revelation, the royal family faced an uncertain future. The disclosure of Harry's true paternity had sent shockwaves through the institution, sparking debates about the monarchy's role in the modern world. The family, once seen as a symbol of unity and strength, was now fractured, and the world was watching to see how they would adapt to the new reality. For Harry, the emotional toll of learning the truth about his paternity had been overwhelming. While his relationship with James Hewitt had always been distant, the revelation that he was his biological father forced Harry to confront a new and painful reality. The man he had called father for his entire life, Prince Charles, was no longer his true father. The weight of that knowledge was something Harry had to process on his own, away from the prying eyes of the press and the public. The relationship between Harry and his father had always been complicated. In the early years, Charles had tried to connect with Harry, but the distance between them was palpable. The royal family, with its rigid hierarchy and centuries-old traditions, often left little room for personal connections to flourish. The pressure to maintain the image of a united family, one that was always dignified, always composed, meant that personal feelings were often pushed aside in favor of duty. As the years passed and Harry grew older, the distance between him and Charles only grew. While they both navigated the complexities of royal life, they did so in their own ways. Charles, ever the dedicated prince, carried out his royal duties with the expectation that his sons would eventually follow in his footsteps. But Harry, more independent and rebellious than his older brother, Prince William, often found himself at odds with the expectations placed upon him. Despite their differences, Harry had always maintained a sense of loyalty to his father. After the death of Princess Diana, Harry leaned heavily on Charles for support, though their relationship had never been without its difficulties. Now, with the revelation of Harry's true paternity, that loyalty was tested in ways Harry had never anticipated. For Charles, the news of Harry's paternity was a devastating blow. As a father, he had always tried to do his best for his children. He had faced his own personal struggles, including his very public marriage to Diana, which had been marred by infidelity and media scrutiny. But the idea that Harry was not his biological son added an entirely new layer of complexity to their relationship. For years, Charles had been Harry's father in every way that mattered. But now, with the truth out in the open, that bond was forever altered. The press, which had been eagerly following the royal family's every move for decades, now turned its attention squarely on Charles. The monarchy, with its centuries of history and tradition, had been built on the idea of royal bloodlines. But what did it mean for the royal family when that bloodline was suddenly called into question? The press flooded the airwaves with speculations about the future of the monarchy. Would Harry's paternity change his place in the line of succession? Would this revelation lead to even more drastic breaks from royal traditions? For Harry, the press frenzy was nothing new. He had grown up with cameras following him every step of the way. But this time, it was different. The personal nature of the revelation, combined with the public's insatiable hunger for answers, made it impossible for Harry to escape the scrutiny. Every word he spoke, every move he made, was analyzed in the context of the paternity revelation. The pressure to maintain his composure was immense, but Harry was determined to show the world that he would not be defined by the circumstances of his birth. His journey, he hoped, would inspire others to question the rigid definitions of identity that society often imposed. As Harry continued to process the emotional fallout from the revelation, his relationship with Meghan Markle remained his anchor. Meghan, who had been by his side through countless trials, now found herself dealing with the fallout as well. While she had always been a target of the media's harsh scrutiny, the revelation about Harry's paternity added a new layer to the challenges they faced as a couple. Meghan, however, stood by her husband with unwavering support, offering him the strength he needed to confront the truth. Their shared commitment to living life on their own terms, free from the constraints of royal expectations, had already led them to step back from royal duties. But now, with the revelation about Harry's true paternity, their decision to step away seemed even more prescient. The royal family's reaction to the scandal had been one of denial and silence, but Harry and Meghan chose a different path, one that was rooted in transparency and honesty. They would not allow themselves to be defined by the past. Instead, they would chart a new course, one that was grounded in their values and their love for each other. The media, however, refused to let them off the hook so easily. Stories about Harry's paternity continued to dominate the headlines, with some outlets accusing the royal family of being complicit in hiding the truth for years. Speculation about the royal family's future continued unabated, with some pundits suggesting that the monarchy might never recover from the scandal. The institution that had once been untouchable was now facing its most significant crisis in decades. But Harry, for his part, remained steadfast in his resolve. He was no longer the young prince caught between two worlds. He was a man who had come to terms with his own identity. The truth about his paternity, while painful, had allowed him to gain a new sense of clarity. He no longer felt the need to live up to the expectations placed upon him by the royal family or the media. Instead, he would live life on his own terms. In private moments, Harry reflected on his journey and what lay ahead. He thought about the legacy of his family, the centuries of royal tradition that had shaped the monarchy, and wondered what his own place in that legacy would be. The revelation of his true paternity had forever altered his relationship with the royal family, but it had also given him the opportunity to define himself in a way that had previously been impossible. As the media frenzy continued to swirl around him, Harry chose to focus on the future. He and Meghan had already begun to carve out their own path, one that was independent of the royal family. Their work with various charities, their focus on mental health advocacy, and their commitment to their children were all part of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that would be written without the weight of royal expectations hanging over them. But the questions remained. What would the future hold for Harry and Meghan? Would the royal family ever truly accept Harry for who he was? Or would he always be seen as the outsider? And, most importantly, what did it mean for the monarchy now that the truth about Harry's paternity had come to light? For Harry, the road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would no longer be bound by the past. The truth had set him free, and in that freedom, he saw the possibility for a new beginning. As Harry continued his personal journey, the royal family grappled with the reality of what had just occurred. The truth about Harry's paternity had upended everything they had worked to preserve. For decades, the royal family had projected an image of strength, unity, and unbreakable tradition, but the revelation shattered that image in an instant. The monarchy had always been a symbol of stability for the public, but now, with one unexpected truth, it appeared to be on the verge of collapse. The immediate aftermath was filled with confusion, discomfort, and uncertainty. The royal family, already accustomed to media scrutiny, now found itself at the center of a crisis unlike any it had faced before. The line between public duty and personal life had always been blurred for royal family members, but with the DNA results publicized, the lines were now even more difficult to navigate. Harry's identity, which had been tied so tightly to the royal family's history and legacy, was now in question. For a family whose image was built on lineage, this revelation left the public wondering what this meant for the future of the monarchy. The palace scrambled to manage the fallout. Palace aides were dispatched to deal with press inquiries, and royal spokespeople worked around the clock to craft statements that would contain the damage. In a private statement, Buckingham Palace expressed its unwavering support for Harry, but it was clear that this was not a simple issue of family dynamics. It was a matter that threatened the very structure of the monarchy. The public, the press, and the international community were watching closely, and the monarchy's ability to weather this crisis would be tested as never before. Behind the scenes, Prince Charles was left to deal with the emotional and familial fallout. His relationship with Harry, which had always been rocky, was now further strained. The news of Harry's paternity didn't just impact their personal relationship, it threatened to undo any remaining connection between them. For Charles, who had spent his entire life preparing for the role of king, this was a blow unlike any other. His future as monarch, once seemingly secure, now appeared uncertain. His relationship with Harry, which had been strained for years, was now reduced to a matter of public spectacle. Charles had always hoped for a smoother transition into his role as king, but the reality was that the monarchy, which had once been seen as a symbol of tradition and stability, was now in turmoil. The royal family's carefully curated image, built over centuries, was now under siege. The next in line to the throne, Prince William, watched as his family crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. William, who had long been seen as the heir to the throne, found himself at the center of the storm. How would he respond to the news about Harry's true paternity? Could the bond between brothers, already weakened by years of tension, withstand the pressure of such a revelation? Meanwhile, Harry, in his own quiet way, began to reflect on the choices he had made and what the future held for him. As he processed the emotional ramifications of the paternity reveal, he began to see a path forward, one that didn't rely on the approval or legacy of the royal family. He had long wanted to live life on his own terms, and now, with the weight of his newfound truth, he was determined to continue that journey. For Harry, the realization that he was no longer just the spare or a side note in the royal lineage was both a relief and a burden. The truth about his paternity, though difficult to accept, allowed him to redefine himself and his place in the world. While the world watched with bated breath, waiting for him to fall in line with the family's expectations, Harry quietly began to carve out a future that was distinctly his own. His relationship with Meghan, his children, and his charity work took on a new significance as he stepped further away from the royal obligations that had once defined him. In the wake of the revelation, the world waited for more details, more reactions, more fallout. But Harry, true to his nature, chose not to let the spectacle consume him. He and Meghan continued to push forward with their philanthropic work, focusing on mental health advocacy, charitable initiatives, and their family. They became symbols of a new kind of royal life, one that was grounded in authenticity and the pursuit of personal happiness, rather than royal duty and tradition. As for the monarchy, its future was uncertain. Could the institution survive a scandal like this? The question loomed large over the entire royal family. Would Harry and Meghan's decision to step away from royal duties become a precedent for others? The world had always viewed the monarchy as an unshakable institution, but with Harry's paternity reveal, that perception was being tested in ways no one could have predicted. The monarchy, long associated with unity, stability, and tradition, now found itself at a crossroads. The future of the royal family was no longer assured, and the public's faith in the institution was shaken. For Harry, the future was clear. He would continue to live life on his own terms, free from the constraints of royal expectations. But for the monarchy, the journey ahead was uncertain. The question remained, could the royal family survive this scandal, or would this be the moment that marked the beginning of the end for the British monarchy as we know it? As the months unfolded, Harry and Meghan continued their journey outside of the royal family, but their lives were anything but quiet. The decision to step away from their royal duties had seemed like the first step toward independence, but now, in the wake of the paternity scandal, that decision took on new meaning. Their journey was no longer about just forging a new path for themselves. It was about surviving in a world where everything they once knew had been upended by one revelation. For Harry, the impact of the truth about his paternity was still fresh. Even though he had come to terms with the knowledge of his biological father, James Hewitt, the public attention continued to follow him everywhere he went. The media's obsession with the royal family, and particularly with Harry's story, showed no signs of letting up. Every interview he gave, every public appearance, was analyzed under a microscope. But Harry, in his own way, was resilient. His life, which had been defined by royal obligations and media scrutiny, had now shifted to one where he could define his own terms. He no longer felt bound by the rules that had governed his upbringing. He was no longer just a prince. He was a man who had faced an unimaginable truth and emerged with the strength to continue living. Meghan, too, found herself caught in the storm of public attention. Though she had been criticized for her decision to marry into the royal family, it was now her support of Harry that became the focus of public fascination. As a couple, they were both polarizing figures, admired by some and vilified by others. Their journey, however, had always been about more than just public opinion. It was about building a future that was true to their values, their relationship, and their desire to make a positive impact on the world. Through it all, their focus remained on their charitable work and their family. Harry had always been passionate about mental health advocacy, and the couple's commitment to causes like these deepened with the passing of time. As they continued to raise their children, Archie and Lilibet, Harry found a new sense of purpose in being a father. The weight of his royal lineage and his place in the monarchy was no longer as significant as the role he played within his own family. For the first time, Harry was able to put his children before everything else. Meanwhile, the royal family was left to pick up the pieces of a legacy that had been severely shaken. The monarchy had weathered many storms before, but none quite like this. The question of Harry's paternity had cast a long shadow over the future of the institution. If the monarchy had once been seen as a bastion of tradition and continuity, it now appeared vulnerable, caught in the same media-driven whirlwind that had affected so many public figures in recent years. Prince Charles, whose reign as king seemed inevitable just months before, was now dealing with a crisis that was beyond his control. While Harry had long been seen as the second son, the revelation about his paternity had forced the public to reassess everything they thought they knew about the royal family. Charles, for his part, found himself stuck between public duty and personal betrayal. His relationship with his son, Harry, was now an ongoing saga that threatened to overshadow his role as monarch. Would the British public continue to support him as their future king? Or had this scandal changed everything? Prince William, who had always been the golden child of the royal family, found himself in a difficult position as well. The tension between him and Harry, already palpable in recent years, had grown even more pronounced. William had always been the future king, the heir to the throne, but now his relationship with his younger brother was mired in scandal. How would the two of them, once close in their younger years, navigate the political and emotional complexities of their relationship moving forward? The future of the monarchy now rested not just on the shoulders of Charles and William, but on the ability of the royal family to rebuild trust and unity in the wake of the scandal. In the days and weeks following the revelation, speculation about the future of the royal family intensified. Experts, pundits, and royal insiders weighed in, offering predictions about what this would mean for the monarchy's future. Some believed the monarchy would survive, though it would be forever changed by this scandal. Others questioned whether the royal family could continue to function in the 21st century if it couldn't adapt to a world where transparency, accountability, and truth were no longer optional. For Harry and Meghan, the questions about their place in the royal family began to fade. While they still held their titles, their focus had shifted entirely to their own lives and the work they were doing outside the royal sphere. The couple's decision to leave royal life was not about renouncing their heritage, but about creating space for themselves to evolve in a way that felt true to who they were. Their journey was about redefining what it meant to be a royal, about showing the world that even those born into privilege and tradition could choose to live their lives on their own terms. As Harry continued to embrace his new identity, he found a sense of peace in knowing that his past, however complicated, no longer defined him. The truth about his paternity had been difficult to accept, but in the end, it was liberating. He no longer felt bound by expectations that were not his own. His life, once dictated by royal duty, was now something he could shape on his own terms. As for the royal family, the future remained uncertain. The institution that had withstood the test of time was now at a crossroads. Would it adapt to the changing landscape of modern society, where the public demanded greater transparency and authenticity, or would it cling to the traditions that had defined it for centuries? Only time would tell. For Harry, the journey had only just begun. He had faced the truth about his identity and emerged stronger for it. As he looked to the future, he knew that his life would no longer be defined by the past. He had found his own path, and with Meghan and their children by his side, he was ready to walk it, no longer bound by the constraints of his royal heritage. And so, as the story of Harry and his family continued to unfold, one thing was certain: their legacy would be defined not by bloodlines or titles, but by the choices they made, the lives they touched, and the new future they were creating for themselves. As Harry's journey continued, so did the perspectives surrounding him. In the public eye, his transformation from a member of the royal family to an independent man was met with mixed reactions. Some viewed him as a courageous individual breaking free from the constraints of his heritage, while others saw him as a man who had betrayed his royal lineage and abandoned his duty. The monarchy, which had once symbolized unity and tradition, was now forced to reckon with the idea of a royal family member living life on his own terms. The royal family itself, with all its long-held traditions, could no longer ignore the seismic shift that had occurred. The monarchy, as an institution, had always relied on the unspoken code of maintaining unity, even in the face of scandal. But now, in the wake of Harry's paternity revelation, the royal family was facing the question of whether it could survive in a modern world where public opinion and personal truth could no longer be swept under the rug. The royal family's carefully crafted image of perfection had been irreparably damaged, and the public was no longer willing to turn a blind eye to the cracks that had appeared. Some members of the royal family, particularly those closer to Harry, attempted to remain supportive, acknowledging the emotional toll the revelation had taken on him. But it was clear that the divisions within the family were deepening. The relationship between Harry and Prince Charles was perhaps the most strained. While Charles publicly expressed his continued love for his son, the emotional chasm between them had only widened. The revelation had shaken their bond to its core, and it was unclear whether it could ever fully be repaired. Prince William, who had long been the heir to the throne and had often been seen as the more stable and traditional member of the royal family, was forced to navigate his own emotions in the wake of the scandal. The tension between him and Harry, which had been brewing for years, became more pronounced. As the future king, William now found himself caught between loyalty to his family and the duty he had inherited, and the changing dynamics within his own family. His reaction to Harry's paternity was one of personal betrayal and public concern for the future of the monarchy. As his relationship with Harry continued to deteriorate, it became clear that